This is Presidential Candidate DeonDJenkins coming to you today with another speech essay entitled "The Devil in the Details of the Reparations Bill." Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and press the notification bell. In the Bible, it states that the devil's main weapon is deception and gives references of him being a schemer, and tells us to protect ourselves against his schemes. Ephesians 6:11 states this, quote, "Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil," end quote. Dr. Neely Fuller also gives reference to a great deceiver, and in his reference of this deceiver, he makes it very specific of the culprit: white supremacy. He also warns us of white supremacy being experts at wasting black people's time in parallel with its deception. And I will add on to the word of God and Dr. Neely Fuller with my own analysis, and that is, white supremacy is of Satan. And if the serpent deceived Eve to partake in eating the forbidden fruit, then the Democratic Party is trying to deceive blacks who descended from American slaves out of their American birthright in a ploy to keep Joe Biden in office by trying to silence our reparations demands, with the bill being used as a shield to disguise itself as an answer to our reparations. In my speech essay entitled "The Four Elements of Reparations," I detailed a very specific calculations of what repairing of damage will look like for blacks who descended from American slaves. I am published for being the only person in my generation to define what reparations entail for our people. And I created a reparation package that would close a separation of beneficiary Americanization between blacks and whites in America, stating that this separation between the two groups was not only a racial wealth gap, but also a separation of benefiting from American citizenship, violating the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment that gives equal protection to all Americans. I was the only person in my generation explaining the rights of equity with an exact number of the distribution of that equity and how this society is divided in four segments: a defensive structure, capital or economy, land, and having access to capital or access to that economy. I was the only person in my generation and of all times who actually established a reparations package detailing those four elements by stating that we cannot get repaired by not getting compensated by those four elements. So creating DMLG, which stands for Defense, Money, Land, Grants, was sufficient because it is the only, and I mean absolutely only, reparations package that details compensation by the four elements of American society. And if you want more information on it, then you must go listen to my speech essay on YouTube entitled "The Four Elements of Reparations." I bring this up to show you that we have people out here who has already started the work on defining America's greatest debt, but this H.R. 40 bill seems to pretend as if we do not. I read the bill a few times, and after reading the bill, I was flabbergasted. Now, before I go on about the bill, one thing that you have to realize is that there was a major movement for the call of reparations, and I am one of its pioneers. And that is a humble statement because when I started in 2015, there was absolutely nobody in American politics speaking on reparations. Some people are now taking the credit for a discussion that I single-handedly started in major media when I ran for president unsuccessfully the first time in 2015 and 2016. I had articles written about my campaign in The Source, Hip Hop Weekly, and BlackNews.com. I was interviewed by Doug Sovern, who is a commentator on the #1 radio station for political news in the state of California, KCBS Radio. I was interviewed by Kristen Ayers on KPIX News, the #1 news program in the Bay Area, California. I was interviewed by the University of Cal Berkeley's newspaper, the Daily California as well, and the Richmond Confidential. These were major interviews that have platforms of millions of people. And this was all in the year 2015. I talked about getting reparations, and it is documented. And even though I did not quite have it defined yet, because I was still in my research phase, I still spoke on the necessities of it and why we are owed it. Bernie Sanders was the most liberal candidate known at the time, but when he was asked about reparations, he stated that he was against it because he thought it was divisive. The most liberal candidate in our generation was liberal about everything else except for reparations. Not even the liberal whites want to close a separation of beneficiary of Americanization between blacks and whites in America. And even though Bernie Sanders denounced reparations, the leader of the ADOS movement, Yvette Carnell, endorsed him for president. Now, in Carnell's defense, she had not created ADOS just yet, and she did not have reparations as her main priority back then. But in only a few years of all that, in just a few years, all of that would change drastically. This was only 5 years ago. But as you see, when I stepped out putting reparations in political discussions and conversations for the first time since the Reconstruction era, showing American media the start of a rise of an up-and-coming politician and politicians with reparations at the center of their platform, especially a presidential candidate gaining attention in mainstream media, you better believe that it sounded the alarm and gave others more confidence to speak on it and support it, and even made careers for some people, either directly or indirectly. And you can do quick Google searches to prove timestamps, proven timestamps on articles that will back up my claims. In just 5 years, we went from the most liberal white candidate in American history stating that he thinks reparations is divisive and getting support from black grassroots activists to Congress trying to deceive us with this HR 40 scam, which I will discuss shortly, while those same activists are now claiming to not support anyone who does not support reparations. And by 2020, I was landing interviews with DJ K. Slay with the political hip-hop freestyle demanding reparations going viral on Facebook, causing Facebook to shadow ban me from running political ads during 2020. But that's another conversation for another episode. To the source stating that I was, quote, the first candidate to raise the issues of reparations on a presidential level, end quote. Articles about my campaign were written in Hip Hop Weekly, allhiphop.com, and I even reached out to podcaster Lord Jamar and was interviewed by him for a special Elections Day interview. The reparations package was calculated by 2018, but the Democratic Party refused to allow me to participate to compete for the debate stages. And white lady Marianne Williamson would literally come out of nowhere claiming to be a reparations candidate and would take the debate stage as a representative for blacks who descended from American slaves for reparations. The Democratic Party was able to manipulate our demands for reparations into a national cry to get Donald Trump out. And they orchestrated a pioneer of the school-to-prison pipeline system to be the front-runner candidate. A man who cannot even walk up a flight of steps without falling on his dentures. Electing a black woman VP became a left-wing media demand, which flattered the egos of black women voters everywhere, which allowed the reparations demand to get neutralized and allowed the coercion of a black woman VP who identifies more with Asians, and who also made it clear that she was not a supporter of reparations by laughing at the mere suggestion of it. And now we have this HR 40 bill used as a guise to literally buy time by creating a payroll of committee members who have all of the time in the world to study a reparations solution without having an expiration date for an actual solution. Joe Biden, We'll select 4 out of 13 committee members for this study, and he will be the final factor of the mitigation of this study, selecting meetups every few months or so, deciding if progress is being made or not. We got Trump out all right, and now our American birthright is being mitigated by the new president who stated that he was against it. His selections will be crucial, and I promise you that his selections will be a calculated scheme. He will pick people who will study this for as long as they can and for as much money that their bank accounts can fill, receiving GS-18 pay, the highest federal pay possible on the federal general schedule, making careers off of the reparations demand, trying to buy more time for Democratic politicians to stay in office without actually giving us reparations. We do not need a study. The study was already created, and a formula has already been discovered. Whites have a serious problem with black leadership, particularly black male leadership, even liberal whites. They want to be in charge of everything, even our reparations package. And I guarantee you that nobody who accepts that reparations committee job is serious about reparations. And Joe Biden will make sure to select people who are not. He will never put anybody in there who is serious, because a person serious about reparations would tell him that we do not need a study on reparations. We need actual policy on reparations. We also have to have the social IQ as blacks who descended from American slaves to demand our own people who have a history of doing the repertory work to be in charge of our reparations, and demand that we have these people in the political executive positions making these decisions, and not old tired white folks. This is a prime example of trying to force politicians who oppose your agenda to bow to your agenda gone bad. Why try to force politicians to support your agenda when you can just vote for people who already have your agenda? Now, you may have to conduct a little more research to find these people, instead of taking the lazy approach by only focusing on candidates that the white establishment postures in front of you, and understanding that there are always more than two choices, and the lesser of two evils is choosing the righteous ones who are not the two evils. When we make this a political code, then we will see a change and would not get deceived by the evils of politics that will hide itself in the details because you refuse to read the fine prints in the details. This is presidential candidate Deon D. Jenkins, the only legitimate reparations presidential candidate, the only black agenda priority presidential candidate, and I approve this message. Thanks for listening.